Rarely in history do people live up to the deeds of their parents. If you do hear about successful parent-child duos, they're almost always the exception, not the norm. We all know about famous/infamous people like Alexander the Great, Napoleon, and Christopher Columbus. But without Googling, can you name any of their children? Probably not. And it's mainly because they all stood in such massive shadows of their fathers. Gideon is in a similar situation, that he casts a massive shadow that made it difficult for any of his kids to fill. Unlike the three men I previously mentioned, one of Gideon's sons did end up like him in the sense that he ruled Israel. Unfortunately for Gideon, however, his son Abimelech was so horrible that he arguably destroyed the family legacy. Now let's see just what he did to earn this reputation. Consider supporting me on Patreon or Ko-fi. You'll find the links below. Thank you. To catch everyone up to speed, Gideon is a judge in the Book of Judges, and he had 70 children by multiple women from different cities throughout Israel. One of his children was born to a woman from Shechem. After Gideon died, his 70 sons were ruling Israel in his place, but one of his sons didn't like that arrangement at all, and his name was Abimelech. Abimelech went to the leaders of Shechem and he made a proposal. He asked them, which is better, have all 70 of my brothers rule over you, or just me? Remember, I am one of your people. The leaders of Shechem discussed this, and they decided that life would be better if they were ruled by one person from their own city, and they gave Abimelech 70 pieces of silver to hire a hitman to help him get rid of all his brothers. Abimelech hired a hitman, and they worked together to get rid of 69 out of Abimelech's 70 brothers. The only one who survived was Gideon's youngest son, Jotham. How did the youngest sibling survive this? Maybe he was good at hide and seek. Maybe he just happened to be at the right place at the right time. We don't know how he survived, all we know is that he did. Abimelech returned to Shechem where he proudly bragged about his successful massacre. That's a weird thing to brag about, but you do you. The leaders of Shechem rewarded Abimelech by declaring him king, and king is an important distinction here, because despite being in the Book of Judges, Abimelech is not a judge. Despite being king, it's not exactly clear what Abimelech is a king of, and here's why. Abimelech is officially declared king in Shechem, so some Bible translations and scholars choose to say that he was merely a king of Shechem, not the king of Israel. However, at the end of Judges 9, it says that Abimelech ruled over Israel for 3 years. Spoilers for the later portion of this video. That wording is important. He ruled, not judged. Again, Abimelech isn't considered a judge. So if he's not a judge, and he ruled over Israel for a period of time, then he is king by that logic, right? Well, it's still disputed. Tradition dictates that Saul is the first undisputed king of Israel, and he obtains that position by divine appointment and popular approval. Abimelech definitely didn't have divine approval, and you'll learn shortly that he didn't have the approval of the people of Israel for very long. But anyway, back to the story. When Jotham learned he was a sole survivor, he was pissed. And when he learned that Abimelech, his murderous, treacherous brother, was made king, Jotham was even more pissed. He climbed to the top of a nearby mountain, and he shouted at the leaders of Shechem a parable about trees. Jotham tells a story about trees trying to figure out who will be their ruler. One tree goes around asking for volunteers to be king, but every tree he talks to says they have more important and productive things to do than rule and be king. Finally, Tree asks a thorn bush if it wants to be king, and the thorn bush says it will be king. The thorn bush even offers shade to the tree as a thank you. Now, we all know what bushes look like, and we all know bushes are small. They do not provide much, if any, shade. The message that Jotham is trying to convey through this parable is a metaphor for the situation Shechem finds itself in. Nobody useful and productive wants to be in charge, so instead they put someone in charge who can cause a great deal of damage and pain, the thorn bush or Abimelech. Jotham then said that the leaders of Shechem have ruined the legacy of Gideon, although now he's finally being referred to as Jerubbaal. By choosing Abimelech to rule over them, a man who got his power by killing all of his brothers, they have betrayed Gideon and destroyed his legacy. Jotham finally ends this tirade by cursing them to burn with Abimelech before running off to a distant land, never to be heard from again. Jotham's rant against Abimelech mostly fell on deaf ears, and Abimelech's rule in Israel went unchallenged for 3 years. But 3 years into his reign, Abimelech was finally challenged. Yahweh sent an evil spirit to sow distrust among the leaders of Shechem. And if you're confused as to why Yahweh has sent an evil spirit, don't worry, it is confusing. Some people in the audience may have immediately made the mental jump to say that Yahweh was sending a fallen angel to cause ruckus amongst the leaders of Shechem. But I'll say this right now, he definitely didn't send a fallen angel. Not because Yahweh wouldn't work with fallen angels, but because fallen angels, as we know them, didn't quite exist at this point in time. The concept of fallen angels, as we know them, come from the book of Enoch, which tells the story of some angelic beings falling from heaven after betraying Yahweh. But the book of Enoch didn't exist when this story was written. Some of you may be thinking that Genesis 6:4, which mentions the sons of God mating with the daughters of man, and that counts as fallen angels. And that is definitely what Enoch is based off, but it's a very bare bones version of what Enoch later develops in its own book. The Book of Enoch will get its own video someday, but for right now, the scholarly consensus around Genesis 6:4's original meaning is that it's a reference to demigods from other nations, not fallen angels. It's essentially a leftover from Judaism's polytheistic days, which was later expanded upon in other books as the religion grew. So if it wasn't a fallen angel, what was the evil spirit Yahweh sent? Well, the best way to figure out what exactly Yahweh sent on his behalf is to look at other instances where he sends spiritual beings to do work for him. And unfortunately for us, at this point in the Bible, Yahweh does a lot of the work himself through the angel of the Lord. Anytime you see the word angel appear, it's more often than not a translation of the word malach, which is very specific to a messenger, usually a divine messenger. And this vague evil spirit isn't a messenger. It's just a vague evil spirit. And that vagueness is why we can't figure out what exactly this thing is. It's not a fallen angel, or a regular angel for that matter. All we got is that it's some kind of spiritual being. And unfortunately for us, generic spiritual beings don't often appear in the Bible. So where do we go from here? Well, one thing we could do is look at neighboring nations of the Israelites, see what they have, and then we can make some approximations of what the Israelites may have had. Similarly to how the Romans had very similar gods to the Greeks, but they weren't a carbon copy pantheon, there were some differences. Neighboring nations had spiritual beings, who the Israelites would later remake into demons, but in their own religions, they were more neutral beings who acted just like people. There were malevolent spirits, and there were kind spirits. It just depended on how they felt about you. We can't say for certain whether the Israelites had entities like this, but again, if their neighbors had it, there's a chance that they had it too. Again, it's difficult to figure out what exactly this evil spirit is because it's so vague. And unfortunately, we're at a point where we need to look at other neighboring nations to get an idea of what it could be. Hello, Mike in Post here. I wanted to just clear up what I was rambling. Essentially what I'm trying to say in this tangent is that while modern readers may retcon this to be a fallen angel, that concept did not exist when Judges was compiled. And demon isn't really an accurate description either because of that word's association with fallen angels. The best way we can describe this creature is a spiritual entity, not an angel, not a demon. It's a spirit who can be aligned with good or evil. I hope that clears things up. Back to the story. So, where was I? Oh yes, as I mentioned earlier, Yahweh sent an evil spirit to sow distrust amongst the leaders of Shechem, and they tried killing Abimelech with booby traps set up around the city. Unfortunately for them though, Abimelech was informed of the traps and he avoided every one of them. Eventually, a man named Gal and his family moved to Shechem, where they quickly became very influential in the city. They were so influential that one night at the local temple, Gal started bad-mouthing Abimelech in an attempt to get the population to rebel. One of the city's officers heard this and reported it back to Abimelech. Abimelech was outraged when he found out, and he took some soldiers with him and they marched towards the temple. Gal saw the army coming, and he was afraid at first, but when another person made fun of Gal's fear, Gal quickly got over himself and started rallying people to defend the temple against Abimelech. Soon, a battle ensued between Gal's militia and Abimelech's military. And unfortunately for Gal, his forces lost so badly that Gal and his family had to run away from the city, never to return. Abimelech then somehow does something so bad, even his father, the man who demanded a son kill his own father, would be disgusted. In order to punish the people of Shechem for betraying him, Abimelech ordered his troops to kill everybody inside the temple. And if you think it can't get worse, Abimelech then turns his military on the city itself, and they start massacring people who weren't even involved in Gal's attempted rebellion. This is his own city, mind you, and then as if it couldn't get any worse, Abimelech's men then poured salt all over the area so nothing could regrow there. Why does this sound so familiar? The city was hurt so bad that it was temporarily abandoned, and the survivors retreated to his stronghold near the temple of El Berith. But Abimelech learned of their escape, and he chased after them with his army. Now you'd think Abimelech couldn't get any worse, attacking his own civilians and destroying his own city. But no, you are so unfortunately wrong. When he finds the survivors' stronghold, he has his army take branches off the trees in the area. The soldiers then surround the temple with the branches and set them ablaze, burning everybody inside the temple alive. I guess cruelty must run in this family or something. Abimelech then took his army to another stronghold, because, they were in the neighborhood. He planned on repeating the same branch thing, but a woman saw Abimelech out the window, and she threw a rock at his head, hitting dead on. Well, I shouldn't say dead, because Abimelech wasn't killed by this, but he felt his skull crack, and he knew his life would end soon. If you remember the Deborah episode, it's considered shameful to die at the hands of a woman, so Abimelech ran to one of his soldiers and begged to be put down by the man. And thus he was. Abimelech was killed by his own soldier, so that he wouldn't die by the hands of a woman. And once his army learned that Abimelech was dead, they disbanded and went home. That was Abimelech's story. It only takes up one chapter in the book of Judges, chapter 9, but despite how short the story is, it's got a lot of stuff. This story has Israel's first king by technicality, and it has a spiritual being who's not an angel either. Now, you might be wondering, if Abimelech's not considered a judge, why is he even in the book of Judges anyway? Well, there are a few possible reasons for that. For starters, Abimelech's story is heavily tied to Gideon's story. So when the book of Judges was being assembled, they could have been considered a package deal. Like if you're going to have the original story, you need to have the sequel too. Along with that, Abimelech's story has some interesting implications for the narrative arc of Judges. If you remember, Judges starts with the line, "In those days Israel had no king." That line is repeated multiple times in the book of Judges, and it's the main point of the book. The purpose of the book of Judges is to show the nation of Israel needs a king to guide them. What Abimelech does is he shows that that king can't just be anyone. It has to be someone who's shown they are capable of being good and productive. Just like the parable of the trees. None of the productive trees wanted to be king, leaving the position open for a thorn bush. If Israel is to have a king, that king needs to be someone who has proven themselves, gained the approval of the wider populace, and finally, is divinely appointed by Yahweh. Abimelech had none of those things. He gained kingship by killing his own brothers. The elite of Shechem made him king without consulting anyone else, and he never received any approval from Yahweh. If anything, he received the opposite. Man, these last two episodes of Judges have been downers. Othniel, Ehud, and Deborah were all fun and empowering, but Gideon and Abimelech had some fairly dark endings with all that murder. I wish I could say it'll get better, but the whole point of this book is to represent how lost the Israelites are without a king, so don't count on the mood increasing anytime soon. The next episode of Judges will focus on Jephthah, and if you know anything about Jephthah, you know some of the darkest stuff is yet to come. Anyway, thank you for watching, leave a like if you enjoyed, and subscribe if you want to see more. I have a Discord where I share memes and updates on future videos, and I also have several methods of supporting me if you want to do so, which can be found below. So until next time, have a good one.